Hey, it's another day of recovery, one day at a time. My name's Erik. I'm a therapist and I work with a lot of issues, including addiction, boundaries, and codependency, anxiety, etc. Today, I wanted to talk about being the bad guy or the sick guy from a perspective of double binds and possibly gaslighting. I'd like to have another video on the gaslighting by itself, but I might hint at that today. So this dysfunction, if you see it from a spiritual point of view, I think it is helpful because then we realize that there's a spiritual realm and it's always interacting with us. This is just my personal belief system. I guess you could say professional belief system, that I really don't believe in just a material world where there isn't some kind of spiritual influence, whether it be God or we'll say dark forces or demons or whatever. And it makes sense to me why then we see such difficult things in this world, because we're not alone. We make choices, and these choices are without influence. So I'm either influenced by God or I'm influenced by the demons. And that makes sense in light of this challenging situation with dysfunction, in terms of where we feel such shame and guilt for someone else's behavior. And I know it's a dark topic, but I think it's really a good description of what happens. The dark topic is when an adult sexually abuses a child. What's happening there is, if it was just a bad person doing something in the woods and the person runs away, help, help, and the police are involved, it's some ways much less trauma. It's when it's a parent, a coach, a brother, a sister, a mother, a teacher. They have this dual role relationship, and the person who's been victimized, or we'll say been sexually abused, walks away feeling responsible for that other person's behavior, that other person's shame, their guilt, which the offender, we'll use the word offender, doesn't want to own. They project it onto the person. And it's so insidious. And I'm not sure that, again, I think of demonic energies. It's just more useful than to think that there's not demonic energies, that people are doing this as so-called sound mind and body. But that influence preys upon the person doing it, as well as then they do this, and then this child feels responsible for the behavior. They feel the shame. They felt like they initiated, and it's a perfect storm. It's a horrible double bind, because the person might have experienced pleasure. The child might have experienced anger, frustration, fear, shame, all of those things. And it's kind of like a horrible molecule of emotion and energies, which keeps them really stuck. So say like they end up growing up without a lot of repair and healing in that, they may find themselves in situations over and over and over again where they feel responsible or too responsible for some other person's behavior, whether it be a boss or a spouse or their own parents that are still kind of putting them down and suggesting all these things. And they don't have the boundary with to say, you know what, this is more about you than about me. This is not my problem. And to be able to do that is a great thing, a really great thing. How these things happen sometimes is that the person who has had their boundaries violated as children don't know how to say no. They don't know how to radiate, kind of, don't mess with me, and that your behavior is your behavior, my behavior is my behavior. And they may feel still more immature because they've never really been able to separate successfully from others. So then it can manifest itself in people pleasing, trying to make that other person happy, etc. Sometimes the person who's been victimized like that ends up then becoming offensive towards others and makes other people feel responsible for their feelings. Okay, so let's, you know, that's one huge spectrum over here. Let's just move it to a little bit more within the normal range here of what we experience. So you might have heard the phrase, "You made me so angry." This is tricky because therapists have said, well, no one technically makes you angry. You're angry because of your own issues, your own response, and you have choice. You can't blame it on someone else. And let's take it to a few steps. Like, you made me, well, sure, I slapped you, sure, I did this and this, but you made me do it. You were so hysterical, I had to do something to restrain you. And this is what I hear from people who've assaulted people physically, is that they somehow made it their the person at their hands' problem instead of taking ownership for themselves. And so that's a mistake. We usually have to teach them how to take ownership for their side and realize that their daughter would have been much safer just without him trying to calm her down. And he would have been better off stepping outside of the house, creating some space and calming down, so that no police were called. But usually the story is, well, no, I had to calm her down. Well, you calmed her down by pushing her into a bathtub, and it was just not a good situation, and she got bruises, etc. So being able to take personal responsibility is key. It's like going inward and finding God, finding your own sense of self, finding what your own emotions are saying, processing that rather than going, outward, outward, outward. And when we see that that's where a lot of us, we're tendencies to want to fix the things on the outside to make us feel comfortable. And we're just predisposed. It's almost like we're defaulted to not want to go this direction, take responsibility for my feelings instead of blaming someone else for them. And by going inward, we find God and we find ourselves, and good things happen. And I'm not talking about the inward where I'm retreating, in the sense of I'll just become, reclusive and, avoiding. That's another side of not having good boundaries, which we'll probably put together a video on. But you can see that the person who projects on the other person their shame, their guilt, making the other person feel responsible for why they did whatever they did, whether they lied or whether they took something or whether they, was inappropriate with someone. It's kind of like a deflection tactic that we deflect our own responsibility onto something else. So then that third party becomes the focus. And if anybody just stays in what we call a meta position or just seeing it as objective, we go, wow, that was pretty slick that the person, rather than answering the question, it's now deflected to this other person's behavior. When you're in the middle of it, it can be very emotional and we can feel very upset about it. And I see this back to our story about sex offenders and people that have abused children, is that somehow, strangely enough, the conversation all goes to what's good for the offender rather than the person who's been victimized. So it's really important to be able to see the whole picture. And I also think it's important not to go overboard against the offender. Yes, they have total responsibility for their behavior, but then they've been afflicted with a systemic thing. And that, not that, I'll just say in those family situations, there's usually poor boundaries. And so boundaries are really pretty cool. So how does gaslighting come in? Gaslighting, I smile because I hear a lot of people say he's gaslighting me and she's gaslighting me. Gaslighting, gaslighting. Well, I would say that I'm old enough to where actually before it was a popular term in psychotherapy, actually I used it apart from any book, apart, and I'm not saying I coined it. I think what happens is therapists who watch this movie called Gaslight could see this in a few situations therapeutically. And we go, wow, this is like the gaslighting movie. I would highly recommend the movie. I would. I would highly recommend the movie with Ingrid Bergman. Okay. If I can find a link, I'll put that in the, I think it's on Archive Internet. And there's other versions of it. It's a really cool story. You'd have to like old movies with black and white and it being slower, suspenseful. The gist of the story line, and this is not a, well, would it be a spoiler? Well, I don't think there's any way around to talk about it without, yeah, that's an interesting thought. Do I want to spoil a movie? This is what I'll do for good boundaries. Don't watch the rest of this video. If you want to go, stop and go watch the video and then pick it up here. I think that's the thing to do. In the movie Gaslight, there is a newly married couple. She has wealth. He acts very caring and kind and concerned, but the viewer gets the sense that something's missing here. And in the olden days, believe it or not, I think, wow, electricity, they didn't have electricity. They had gas piping in the wall and a gas lamp. And at night, you would turn these off and the gas would just stay there. Wild. Sounds not safe, but you'd turn it on and then you'd turn it off. And that's what was lighting these flames. So this flickers for whatever reason. And she sees it and he goes, what are you talking about? It's just normal. I don't see that. So this goes on and on to where there's all these things that happen where he discounts her experience. And by discounting her experience, and he's not in denial, by the way. Okay, so this is, we're going to see where I make a distinction. He is behind the scenes creating these events to cause her to get more and more psychologically unstable. And he's giving her medicine to help her. Okay. And the goal for him, the devious goal, is to have her kill herself so that he didn't do anything wrong, because he was caring all along. He was the caring husband. So a number of things about this. One is it's kind of a different topic than what we're talking about. But it relates in terms of I'm projecting my stuff onto you. And if it's done in the caring way, I'm concerned about your mood instability, or I'm concerned about this. I might label you narcissistic. It's very popular to do. Again, nowhere have we been in a society where we're all now labeling each other all these dysfunctional terms and taking the DSM-4 diagnosis manual and just going for it. It's like, that's craziness. Talk about boundaries, and there's therapists that don't seem to be concerned. Everybody now can have one. And when I was taught that you had to have a license, you had to be a mental health therapist to do that. But somehow it's gotten on the internet. And so people are labeling each other these disorders. And then people are taking it as that means anything. Sorry, I got off track there. But that's a form of gaslighting in the sense that we're doing this out of care and concern. In Christian communities, this can happen. where it comes across as caring and I'm concerned about so and so, but now let me tell you about so and so. That's actually gossip. Yeah. We have to watch ourselves. Things that look like concerns could be judgments. So we have to be oh so careful to not do that. Um, so gaslighting, how people are using it is, say like you take an alcoholic family, dad or mom is totally unaware that they have an alcohol problem. And it's denial, it's unawareness. There's nothing devious here. They really don't think there's a problem. And then the rest of the family is concerned about it. The double bind there is they don't talk about it because in a dysfunctional family, they don't talk, they don't feel, they don't trust. So we're not going to talk about things that we see because it probably will be an argument and people will then turn it around on us. And then there's this back and forth ugliness. And so I don't want that. We don't want feelings. So that's why we numb ourselves with alcohol, and sex, and food, and spending, and gambling, and fixing others. Actually, this is where it kind of ties in with projection. And how it ties in with projection is I don't want to feel my feelings, so I'm going to project them onto you and make it your problem. And then that other person, if they have not the best boundary system, reacts and retaliates and screams and yells. And it's like, see, you actually have a problem. And so we provoke them into that. And this I see in divorced couples a lot, where it's a setup where we need to look better in court so that then they do their song and dance that looks so cool and so caring and so nice for those children. I'm concerned about the dad or the mom and this. And then we're setting them up for failure. Because then on the other underside, we're poking them with a stick legally and scaring them. And then I might as well let this buy us out. I'm not saying all attorneys are bad. This is not what this is about, but the attorneys become part of this system to then unconsciously put fear into the clients more than they might have had to begin with. They don't really offer a something like mediation or something more collaborative. So then what happens is that it becomes a war back and forth, all under the guise of care for their children. And this is another way we make the other person the bad guy. Rarely do we see the solution, which is each parent to say, I am so sorry. We'll say, Mark and Mary and Steve, I failed as a father. I failed as a husband. I was not able to really keep marital vows. And this seemed to be the best possible situation for me to step away from it. Again, you would ask if I could do that. I'd probably repair it, but go along with me in this. Instead, we blame the parent without saying it in words. That'd be too obvious. And then it just creates this weird, horrible, dysfunctional marinade to live in. There are people that actually have participated in this. I probably have done my share of blaming my spouse and trying to avoid my own stuff. See, so that's where it's this thing. And so when kids or people are marinated in this kind of dance, it just encourages people to either go to extremes where they take too much responsibility for someone else's feelings or they don't take enough. Clinical words for this is shameless and shameful. This comes from a book called Facing Codependence by Pia Melody. I'll put a link there. I don't get any kickbacks or anything from this. I just like the book. I think it's a useful tool, and I have hardly anyone who did not really appreciate the recommendation. That a shameless person just goes beyond being human. That like they don't really have any faults. When I've gently asked this question in couples where there's someone who's an identified addict, and then I ask the spouse, well, do you have issues? Like, it's so easy to get into codependency. And they go, oh, yeah. I said, well, what are some of the challenges you face, or what are some of the dysfunctions or things you bring? And you can see the uncomfortableness. They just aren't in touch with anything they do wrong. And shameless people have shameless behavior. They don't take responsibility for their behavior. Healthy shame helps me know I'm not God, that I can do things that are very human. And sometimes in doing those things, we get really, really embarrassed and we feel ashamed, but it's just kind of like we are human, we're not God. Toxic shame is where we have so much shame that we feel not human, like we feel less than the rest of humanity. And we have to be careful to not go that direction because it's a form of pride. And people in faith traditions where they try to be humble, sometimes, you go towards humble and then they get into this shame thing. And that's not what we're talking about. Okay. Shameless behavior also goes this direction where they're really arrogant, they're haughty, they see people as less than, because they just don't understand that people make mistakes. Perfectionistic comes to mind, that it's like, well, they're the governor, they should be perfect. You know, um, you could argue it saying, well, they should have had better skills to do their job. Yes, I believe in that, but they are human. They're a human being with limits. And we can either be merciful and yet kind of hold people accountable, or we can do both, by the way, to try to help people see where they've done wrong. But if they really don't want to see it, they won't see it, especially if they're shameless. And we might try to shame them into seeing their mistakes. I don't think that works. I think it's short sighted and it's part of the same dysfunction. If I work on my own life, try to be an example, what happens is people around me might either want what I have or they don't want what I have, but rarely will it come from preaching at them. So shameless people can be, it's hard to feel even with them. There's always this sense where there's a step above. You never, and when you share something which you're going through, they just have a quip or something that's just a little bit, there's this kind of unhealthy competition. Instead of being able to go lower and even just say we all have problems. So shame-free or accepting people are really different. They're so in touch with their humanity, and the best word and the best way to put it is that you just want to be around them because you feel safe with them. You feel like they're not going to step on you or step over you or see you as bad or even good. They don't put you on a pedestal. They're just human to human. 12-step people are kind of like that in the healthy sense. There are some unhealth there, but we're not trying to be better than or less than. It's not about that. It's kind of stepping out of that whole paradigm. So back to our original topic, when one's gaslighting or making someone else the sick guy, that's like, I'm better than you and I'm here to help you. Which maybe they weren't asking for help. Maybe that's, and so what is some of the solution here? To recognize what's going on. And when you're around, and I don't like to categorize people as they are this or that. So please forgive me if I use that, like they do this or they become what they're doing. Like if I were to use the word narcissist or an addict, it's more what they do or what experience they dysfunction rather than who they are as an identity. But if you're in a situation where there is a person's not taking a lot of personal responsibility for their side of things, they seem to be metaphorically pointing the finger at you, making you feel responsible for their behavior. and maybe trying to help you get better and give you therapy advice. And it's not a safe relationship. So what do? Step one is to identify that you see it, that's what's happening. And how do we do that? We have to get out of our own emotional turmoil, go inward and breathe and pray. And sometimes I have like a little notepad that helps me take notes. It just is something grounding about it. And then it's like, oh, I think this is happening. And we have to be so careful not to judge them. But it's like, wow, they don't seem to be taking much responsibility for any of this. So then I will admit I've tried to challenge them and criticize them, or not criticize, but try to challenge them to see that doesn't really work. But if one were to ask these questions, like, well, what part do you think you have had in this conflict? Is there anything you think you could have done better? That's what I'm asking myself. What could I have done better? But it would help me as a person to know you would want to work on your side to better our relationship. And I had this thought. I'm debating whether to share it. Yeah, so I think I can share this with respect. This isn't my immediate family. And I was in a situation where I had family where I confronted them. And I think I had to do it as tough as I needed to. And I was told that we were perfect. They actually use those words. We were perfect, and I wouldn't change anything. That didn't really give me much direction to go. And I probably in my time judged them for that by saying, really, who's perfect? Like that's dysfunctional, etc. But somewhere that didn't last long. It helped me to see that the sickness that a person's afflicted with is that if you're perfect, then there's nothing you could have done better. And this relationship involved a lot of violence. Then I saw it as they just struggle with denial and not being able to take ownership. The good news is through their own pain and suffering, they did take responsibility. They were apologetic and that they were able to see it later. And that's why I really would show this story, because I had a number of people saying, you should just get away from these people. I didn't feel in my heart of heart that was the right thing to do. I think that anybody can change. And they did in some ways. They became great assets to me, not only for love and forgiveness, but that in my work as a therapist. I hear it a lot. People say, my parents will never change, or this person will never change. And I smile and I say, I'm quick. If I'm probably reactive as a therapist to say, you know what? Anybody can change. And if we say that about them, then we're kind of saying it about ourselves that we'll never change. So everybody can change. And my parents did change for the better. Um, and so in this conversation about people that could be gaslighting or projecting bad stuff onto you, making you feel responsible, be aware that part of your own solution is to realize that right now, just for right now, this is their coping mechanism. And perhaps later, things can change. And I think it helps lessen the hurt we feel. It lessens the hurt a lot to realize people are just doing the best they know to do. It's probably not the best, but they're doing the best they know to do. And I don't need to participate in that. So another solution is if I let the person, if I let it soak in to my soul, like I'm responsible for their behavior, it's not going to help them. I'm 100% convinced of that if I take responsibility for someone else's abuse towards me, or you were asking for it, or, you know, It's not helping. I would say this to any person who's been victimized sexually. You don't need to act as a victim. You can get out of that role. But what happened to you, you didn't have, if you were under 18, that's kind of our understanding. I think it just limited that understanding because a 19-year-old, a 20-year-old, there are people that find themselves in that situation where they feel like responsible for the person's behavior. That no, they're not responsible. And you can be free by not taking responsibility. That being said, there's no harm in asking, well, what part did I have in any of this? So it's kind of a flexible way. And my part is I may be having thin boundaries. My part may be that I keep making concessions. I remember one time my dad apologized to me. This was shocking because here I am, a therapist of many years, long history of challenges. And he apologized for his behavior, let's say like last night. I said, oh, that's okay. I'm so quick. That was shocking because it was emotional for me to have him say that. And he says, no, it wasn't okay. And it's like, wow. So to let people be people, to have a wise estimation of ourselves, to try to be humble and to realize we're all doing the best we know to do, gets us closer to God. And all things could be used, to help me get closer to Him. So hopefully this is helpful to you. You take care and have a great day.